the RMS Queen Mary, an icon of luxury, elegance, speed, and a maritime engineering marvel. She was launched in September 1934 and carried out her maiden voyage in May 1936. At 1,019 feet long and weighing 81,000 tons, the Queen Mary became known as the Queen of the Sea, being bigger, faster and more powerful than the ill-fated Titanic. Her unique Art Deco design and construction were unrivalled, and nearly 100 years after her launch, the Queen Mary is still regarded as one of the most stylish ocean liners ever made. The Queen Mary was the pinnacle of luxury travel. She attracted the rich and famous, from movie stars and singers to political figures like Winston Churchill, who firmly considered this majestic liner to be the only way to cross the Atlantic. The Queen Mary was drafted as a troop ship during World War II and nicknamed the Grey Ghost. She transported thousands of Allied soldiers wherever they were required. Retired from transatlantic service in 1967 and now docked in Long Beach, California, the Queen Mary today operates as a hotel and tourist attraction. But this is a ship that's seen tragedy, illness, accidents, and at least 59 deaths. Widely regarded as one of the most haunted locations in North America, its decks, engine rooms, swimming pool, elegant lounges, and numerous cabins seem to be home to a plethora of spirits who refuse to leave. Welcome to the Ghosts of the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary served as an ocean liner for 31 years, and throughout that time, death was a constant companion. She weathered storms and disasters, reunited families, and became part of maritime history itself. After the ship was permanently docked in Long Beach, tales of the paranormal began to circulate. Employees would talk of seeing unusual dark figures from the corner of their eyes, would hear disembodied voices conversing together, and were shocked to listen to their names being called out in empty corridors. Objects and belongings would disappear, only to be found elsewhere on the ship in the most surprising of places. Projectiles such as coins and badges would be thrown, and some members of staff quit on the spot. Are the spirits unhappy that their days on the open seas are over, or are they protesting about the transformation of this magnificent liner into a tourist attraction? However we regard it, it seems the ghosts of the Queen Mary are quite happy to let you know they are present, and they are not leaving in a hurry. Part of the Queen Mary's unrivalled luxury was its 2 swimming pools. Second-class passengers had exclusive use of a pool near the ship's stern, but the real jewel in the crown was the first-class swimming pool. Standing 2 decks high, this Art Deco masterpiece was inspired by London's Royal Automobile Club in Pall Mall and would have been half filled with 110 tons of seawater heated by the boilers below. Until World War II, the pool was exclusively for first-class guests, but as air travel became more popular, the Queen Mary needed to offer more amenities for those travelling third class. Third-class passengers could use the pool for 2 hours, whilst the first-class passengers were at high tea. After use, it was drained, cleaned and refilled for the first-class passengers. Although the pool was constructed with 2 diving boards, these were removed for safety reasons before her maiden voyage. The pool was extremely popular, but it was closed and drained of its water in rough weather, as it was simply too dangerous. The pool was decorated with faux mother-of-pearl and gold quartzite, a stone held dear by the ancient Egyptians, and this combined with water are known to be conduits, and could explain why this area is said to be so haunted. During World War II, this area was drained, converted and stacked with bunk beds that could sleep 110 troops. Considered by many to be the most active area of the Queen Mary, the pool room is home to several ghosts, who have been seen and heard numerous times by staff and guests. The most communicative and beloved spirit on the Queen Mary haunts this beautiful pool. She is the ghost of a little girl, and her name is Jackie. Visitors come from all over the world hoping to communicate and possibly get a glimpse of Jackie. There are many theories as to who she could be, but nobody is sure of her identity. The ship's records do not include the death of a female named Jackie or Jacqueline. However, the ship's records are not 100% accurate. There are gaps where an autopsy was carried out and the details failed to be sent back to the ship. The British government did not share details of deaths related to construction, World War II troops, and family members who travelled during the war bride journeys. But this leads to even more questions. Could Jackie have been a stowaway? Could a passenger have Jackie as a middle name? Was she the daughter of a serviceman or a first-class passenger? We may never know her identity, but what we do know is that she enjoys interacting with people and has been captured on camera and audio technology numerous times. The first mention of Jackie was in 1991 when the late psychic medium Peter James made contact with a child around 5 or 6 years old in the Royal Theatre, an area that used to be the second-class swimming pool. She apparently said, "Meet me in the other pool," and had an incredibly strong presence. James was unaware that this spot was once a pool, but obliged and moved to the first-class pool with the accompanying film crew. Here, he communicated with her for around 10 minutes, with Jackie audibly saying, "Mummy, I'm caught," and "I'm found." They also captured her singing on film. James believed that she had drowned in the second-class pool and that her death wasn't accurately recorded. Many visitors and staff claim to have seen Jackie playing peekaboo. Her dark, shadowy face will emerge on the upstairs balcony before suddenly ducking down, and then she'll appear in another area of the pool. Paranormal investigators have captured numerous EVPs of Jackie, but have also audibly heard her laugh, sing, cry, and call for her mother and father. She attempts to hold people's hands and can respond enthusiastically to her 3 favourite songs. London Bridge is Falling Down, Ring a Ring a Rosie, and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Investigators have discovered that if you purposely miss off a final word of a line, for example, "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, how I wonder what you," Jackie will blurt out, "Ah." This also happens when people sing the alphabet, with Jackie favouring the letters V and Z. Those who are lucky enough to see Jackie manifest describe her appearance consistently. She is a small child wearing a white dress with blonde curly hair, a fringe, brown eyes, and a rounded smiling face. she has been seen running in the vicinity of the pool, leaving small wet footprints, despite the pool being empty since the late 1980s. She has also interacted with trigger objects, including a red pen and a piece of paper, that were left alone for 30 minutes during an investigation. After this time, a red mark was visible on the page. Jackie has been seen and heard elsewhere on the ship, including in the boiler room, where she sings and walks across the raised platforms, but she seems to be most active in the pool room. She was observed in June 2016 by a female member of the security staff at 2:15 in the morning, standing in the corridor of A deck. Concerned that a young child was maybe lost at such an hour, she approached the unattended child, who lifted her arms as though indicating to be picked up, but then completely disappeared. Is this Jackie perhaps mistaking the member of staff for her mother? A similar incident occurred on January the 15th, 2000. A female member of staff was vacuuming in an exhibition area when there was a sudden drop in temperature. When the lady turned around, she witnessed a little girl sucking her thumb with glowing eyes. The little girl stretched her arms up as though wanting to be carried and began to float towards the member of staff before suddenly disappearing. Could it be that Jackie passed away as an adult but returns as a spirit child to a place she loved? Many sceptical guests and crew members have become firm believers after encountering Jackie. She seems to be most active in the last 2 weeks of November and the first 2 weeks of December, between 7 and 10 p.m. In April 2000, 2 guests were walking down the promenade deck when the female guest felt a distinct tug on her sleeve. She turned to see a small blonde child with a distressed look on her face. She beckoned her husband to turn and look, but the child had completely vanished. Later that evening, the female guest returned to her room to grab her purse when she felt the same tug on her sleeve once more. She witnessed the blonde little girl walking and began to follow her. The guest followed the little girl for several minutes before observing her walk through a solid door. Was this the manifestation of Jackie once again? Jackie has also been seen outside of the ship too. Just next to the Queen Mary is a large white dome that currently operates as a cruise ship check-in. But for a time, it housed Howard Hughes's Spruce Goose, a huge wooden plane. The Spruce Goose was moved to Evergreen Space Museum in Oregon in 1993, but the security guards on the Queen Mary also had to keep watch in the dome as well as on the ship. One evening, a security guard saw a little girl, aged around 7, walking over the plane's wings. He shouted that this was dangerous and that she needed to get down immediately. She replied, "Okay," and jumped from the plane's wings. The security guard watched in horror and rushed over to see if she was okay, but she had completely vanished into thin air. Does this mean Jackie, as a mobile and intelligent apparition, is the Queen Mary's most powerful ghost? Another female apparition is said to haunt the vicinity of the swimming pool, and she has become known as Sarah. She is said to haunt the dressing rooms in particular, just next to the pool, and is sometimes believed to be a rather aggressive spirit. She seems to have a close friendship and acts as a protector for Jackie. Some paranormal investigators believe the ladies' changing area in the first-class swimming pool is a vortex, a whirlpool of electromagnetic energy that acts as a portal between our world and the next. Peter James referred to Sarah as a guardian, a gatekeeper, who allows spirits to enter and exit the Queen Mary itself. Those who have witnessed Sarah describe her as being around 8 to 10 years old, quite thin, and with dark brown hair. Her identity, as with Jackie, is unknown, and there is no evidence in the ship's records of a death of a child named Sarah. Another apparition that is said to haunt the dressing rooms is that of a cat. This ghostly feline has been seen, heard and felt numerous times. The Queen Mary did carry roughly 12 cats to keep the rat population down and dogs belonging to guests. The kennels were located on the port side of the sports deck, and even a lamppost was provided to make the dogs feel at home. It is said that this spirit cat belonged to a crew member many years ago. In 2010, during a late-night paranormal tour, a group started an electronic voice phenomena, or EVP session, using recording equipment. One of the guests said that something was touching her foot, that it felt like fur, and the entire group heard a distinct meow. Although the group only heard it once, the tour guide heard it again on a tour a week later. It seems this friendly little feline is quite happy to interact with guests. Numerous visitors have reported seeing female apparitions wearing vintage swimming costumes inside the pool room and even inside the pool itself, despite it being empty of water. The pool was an important aspect of life on board the Queen Mary. Guests would relax, exercise, socialise and take advantage of the now removed Turkish baths, with its steam and massage rooms. On one occasion, a tour guide was alone in the pool room waiting for a group to arrive. As she looked across the pool to the opposite side, she witnessed a female, roughly in her 60s, standing by the edge of the pool. She was dressed in an old-fashioned black and white one-piece bathing suit and bathing cap. The guide was somewhat alarmed. The lady was about to dive into an empty pool. The guide called out and immediately radioed security, concerned this could have been a visitor who'd accidentally walked into the pool room somehow. The woman ignored the guide, who yet again shouted, "Don't dive," but at that moment, the lady disappeared. Security arrived and a thorough search was made of the entire pool area, but there was no trace of the lady in the vintage costume. Security confirmed they knew of several incidents of this particular apparition appearing. Is this the apparition of a former passenger who simply enjoyed a daily swim in this beautiful Art Deco pool? A more modern ghost is also seen in the pool room. A young woman, thought to be in her early 20s, has been seen walking down the stairs and then disappearing. She wears clothing that appears to be from the 1960s, including a miniskirt. She's also been seen standing next to and walking past the elegant support columns and drinking water fountains. Perhaps she was a passenger on the Queen Mary's final voyage to Long Beach in 1967. Some guests and members of staff have reported seeing the ghost of a small toddler around the decks of the Queen Mary, inside several staterooms, and in the first-class swimming pool room. He's described as a very young boy, surrounded by blue light, with red curly hair, dressed in a navy blue and white sailor's outfit. Some people sense he is somehow related to Jackie, perhaps a little brother, but there's no way to verify this. Again, we do not know the identity of this boy, and there are no records to suggest he died on board, But could he be a spiritual friend to Jackie? Several paranormal investigators have made contact with this ghostly little lad, who has been recorded giggling inside the pool room and just outside, close to the elevators on our deck. A guest staying on the Queen Mary witnessed an elderly lady with her hair in a bun and wearing a white vintage dress, walking hand in hand with a little boy wearing a sailor's suit. They walked straight through the solid wall of the Grand Salon, which is located opposite the first-class pool viewing area. Could this be the little boy's grandmother? The apparition of a male member of staff is said to haunt the port side of the dressing room stalls, close to the toilets, as well as the area under the swimming pool staircase. Many male spirits are said to haunt the Queen Mary, from retired captains to prisoners of war, from engineers and mechanics to servicemen, as well as several guests who died on board. This particular energy is thought to be a night watchman. During a séance, contact was made with a male energy who was asked if he had financial difficulties. The word yes was captured as an EVP, and it is widely believed that he continues his rounds on the ship at night and is unaware he is now deceased. He can be quite an aggressive figure, and many people feel uncomfortable when he is around. Occasionally, projectiles are thrown at guests, and the man in the dressing room stalls is often blamed. We do know that a night watchman passed away in the Turkish bath area just next to the swimming pool. He regularly used the Turkish baths, but suffered a fatal stroke one evening. His body was discovered the following day by his colleagues. Is the first-class swimming pool the most active area on the ship? Many believe it is. B-deck is thought to be the most paranormally active area of the RMS Queen Mary. During the ship's operational years, B-deck included the third-class lounge, playroom, and hair and beauty salons. Room B340 is arguably the most famous room on the Queen Mary, and the myths and stories associated with it are legendary in paranormal circles. On a daily basis, guests and paranormal investigators congregate outside this room, desperately hoping for a glimpse or an encounter with the other side. But are these stories true? Is it the case that Disney, when they took ownership, invented such stories to attract the public? We may never know, but according to staff on the Queen Mary, more paranormal encounters happen on B-deck than any other. The Queen Mary opened as a hotel in early 1972, but the rooms on B-deck became open to the public in the 1980s. Stories suggest that shortly after this, reports began to reach the management that unusual activity was occurring frequently in room B340. Visitors reported lights flicking on and off, knocking from inside the room late at night, clothes and coat hangers being strewn all over the floor, and taps turning on when nobody had touched them. Suitcases would be opened or moved within the room, and even the heavy portholes would open and close by themselves. The housekeeping staff were puzzled to find taps running when nobody had stayed in the room for several days, and towels lying on the floor, despite the room being serviced previously. On one occasion, in the late 1980s, the bed had just been made, and the member of staff left the room and shut the door to pick up fresh towels from a trolley in the hallway. When she returned to the room a few minutes later, She found the bedclothes, sheets and covers thrown from the bed, and that the bed itself had been moved to the opposite wall of the room. Desperately scared, she found a security guard who'd been in the corridor for the duration of her shift. He had not seen anyone in the vicinity of B340 at this time. This was too much for the housekeeper, who quit on the spot. Due to a high number of incidents, research was carried out into the history of the room. The ship's archives confirmed there was an incident on May the 5th, 1966, during the Queen Mary's final year of operation, when a guest named Mrs. W.T. Barry was staying in this particular room. She reported her bed covers being pulled off numerous times, rather abruptly, in the night. Thinking they were just falling off, she would return them, but these disturbances persisted and became rather frustrating. Exasperated, Mrs. Barry sat up to see the figure of a tall man with dark hair and a moustache standing at the foot of her bed. Believing she had an intruder, she screamed and the mysterious figure disappeared. A steward making his rounds that night heard the scream and raced over to the distraught woman, but was unable to find any evidence of the man. He had been in the corridor for at least an hour and hadn't seen anyone exit or enter any of the rooms in the area. Eventually, the room was closed to guests, but in 2018 it reopened as a suite comprised of 3 smaller rooms joined together. It was marketed as a haunted room experience, and people would pay $1,000 per night to stay in the room. The newly designed room steered entirely into the suite's haunted claim, including a Ouija board, tarot cards, and a crystal ball as part of its furnishings. There are even instructions on the bathroom wall explaining how to summon Bloody Mary by chanting her name 3 times while facing the mirror. On the first day of the room being available, the guest contacted the front desk to ask the staff to switch off the special effects and to stop playing pranks. The member of staff politely explained there were no pranks. But for the visitors, this was too much. They checked out at 2 a.m. and didn't make it through the night. This happened several times after the room reopened. The room has changed numbers over the years, and for a while it was B226 before becoming B340. Although there are no officially recorded deaths in room B340, rumours abound that in 1948 an Englishman named Walter J. Adamson was found dead here under mysterious circumstances. He allegedly assaulted and murdered 2 women in England and was on the run from the authorities. He boarded the RMS Queen Mary as a stowaway and was not discovered until day 4 of the journey to New York. When he was located, he was placed in room B226 as the isolation ward was full. A guard was placed outside of his door to ensure Walter did not escape. Roughly an hour after he entered the room, he started to pound on the door with terrific force, desperately shouting, "Let me out, they're going to kill me." The guard was convinced this was a part of an elaborate escape plan and ignored Walter's cries. For 45 minutes, Walter continued his desperate pleas, and then the room fell silent. The following morning, on entering New York, officers arrived with handcuffs to arrest Walter and hand him back to the authorities. When they entered the room, they found Walter dead with horrific injuries. The walls of the room were dripping with blood. Theories about Walter's death vary. Could it be that a crew member discovered Walter's crimes and took justice into their own hands? This is possible, as there is a small door in B340 as it stands today that leads into a hallway. Could a murderer have entered through here and made it back out again without being seen? Perhaps the guard simply turned a blind eye to his crewmates' actions. We will never know if this gruesome story is true, but does it explain why there is no record of such an event? A murder aboard the magnificent Queen Mary by the hands of the crew would only bring negative publicity, so did a cover-up occur. During paranormal tours of B340, it is not uncommon for ghost hunting apps to come up with the words Walter and help, despite the guide making no mention of Walter up to that point. Is Room B340 truly haunted, or are the stories simply creations for publicity? What do you think? Located on the starboard side near the bow on B deck is the Carpathia Room. Named after the steamship RMS Carpathia, another cunard transatlantic liner, she became famous for rescuing the survivors of the Titanic after she struck an iceberg and sank on her maiden voyage in the North Atlantic in April 1912. The Carpathia travelled 58 miles at speed through the treacherous ice fields and arrived roughly 2 hours after the Titanic had sunk. 705 survivors were rescued and brought to New York on the Carpathia. The Carpathia sank on July the 17th, 1918, after being torpedoed by a German submarine in the southwest approaches of Great Britain and Ireland. The Carpathia Room is used largely for private events and is not currently open to the public. But on August the 30th, 2015, the room was included on a ghost tour as other locations were being utilised for functions. The guide, named Anthony, was tapped on the arm by two ladies as he switched on the lights in the Carpathia Room. They said that for a brief moment, as the group entered the room, they witnessed a lady in a blue dress and hat standing close to one of the portholes. Within seconds, she had vanished. They described her appearance. She had reddish-coloured hair and was about 5'4" tall. Anthony wasn't sure if the women were genuine, but continued the tour as planned. Just a few hours later, a woman matching the same appearance was seen by a member of staff in one of the elevators before slowly fading away. The following day, Anthony discovered that his beloved aunt had died in her sleep, aged 90. When looking at some old photographs, he noticed her appearance matched that of the lady in blue, and that his aunt was well known for wearing blue as it was a colour that complemented her hair and eyes. Could it be that his aunt appeared in spirit form just before she passed away, on a ship that meant so much to Anthony? On another occasion, a group of Girl Scouts bravely spent the night in the Carpathia Room. In the middle of the night, one of them woke up and started to scream. She was convinced there was a presence near her. Was this simply a nightmare, an overactive imagination, or even sleep paralysis? Perhaps we will never know. A woman in white with red curly hair has also been seen in the corridors of B deck. She was witnessed in July 2003 by a group of friends who were on a tour at that time. The figure turned and looked at the friends and then walked through a wall into one of the staterooms. Is this the same figure who haunts the Carpathia Room? She was also witnessed by a female member of housekeeping who was preparing a room for occupancy. As she entered the room, she witnessed a figure dressed in white standing near the porthole before walking through the closed door. When she looked down the corridor, the woman was drifting towards the stern of the ship, towards the isolation ward. Could this be a former passenger returning to a ship she loved so much? Unlike the Titanic, where class divisions were made at deck level, the Queen Mary determined class by the smoothness of the ride. First class would occupy the mid-sections of the ship, where the smoothest ride would occur. Second class was towards the stern of the ship, which was deemed to be relatively smooth, but was affected by the vibrations and noise of the engines below. Third class would be located near the ship's bow, where the roughest conditions were generally endured. It is fair to say the third-class passengers would have the least enjoyable ride, as the Queen Mary ploughed through rough seas, with waves sometimes 65 feet tall, and with the bow moving up and down and rolling from side to side at incredible angles. One of the most dangerous locations on the entire ship was the third-class stairs that ran between A deck and B deck. Unlike other staircases on board that are punctuated with small landings, the third-class staircase was different. The third-class staircase has two main design flaws. Firstly, they face the bow of the ship itself as opposed to the stern, and secondly, they are extremely steep. As passengers ascended and descended the staircase, it could either drop from directly beneath their feet or elevate from the 45-degree angle they stand to up to 90 degrees, as the Queen Mary braces the huge rise and fall of the enormous waves of the North Atlantic. Numerous passengers were thrown and sustained serious injuries from the third-class staircase. George Sidney Wayman, aged 58, a third-class passenger, was found dead at the bottom of these stairs on the 10th of October 1954. His cause of death was coronary thrombosis, suggesting a heart attack, but could he have fallen and hit his head too? It is thought he is the man in black who haunts this area. He is seen as a dark, shadowy figure who ascends and descends the staircase with clearly audible footsteps, before turning sharp left or right and then disappearing. He has been witnessed over 24 times by passengers and crew. In the early 2000s, two guests were walking along A deck towards the staircase. It was late at night, and as they approached the staircase, they noticed a tray just outside one of the cabin doors. They witnessed the tray fly down the corridor, the contents scattering everywhere, before coming to rest just a few metres away from them. At the same time, they felt a rush of cold air past them and saw a sign fall off the corridor wall. There were no other passengers around, and the visitors ran from the location. On August the 30th, 1939, the Queen Mary departed Southampton on her final, pre-war, peacetime voyage. She carried 2,552 passengers, including Bob Hope and his wife, as well as millions of dollars of gold bullion. Tensions in Europe were high, and orders were given on the 2nd of September for the crew to black out the ship's portholes. On September the 3rd, the UK and France declared war on Germany, and just one day later the Queen Mary arrived in New York, and Captain Peter Murchie was told to await orders. Because the Queen Mary was a constant target for Hitler's troops, every inch of her was painted camouflage grey in an attempt to conceal her. All of her luxury furnishings and fittings were removed and stored in Cunard warehouses. World War I, Lewis and Vickers machine guns were positioned on the ship, as well as 33 guns, 12 rocket launchers, a rangefinder, and a girdle responsible for deactivating magnetic mines. On the 21st of March 1940, orders were given for the Queen Mary to leave New York for Sydney, Australia, where she would be fitted as a troop ship, increasing accommodation from 2,140 to 5,500 passengers. The RMS Queen Mary and her sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth, contributed greatly to the war effort. The Queen Mary was in constant danger of being attacked. Hitler wanted her gone and offered a prize of $250,000 and the Iron Cross to any skipper who could sink her. British intelligence worked constantly to ensure she was safe. She managed to evade disaster when she entered the port of Trinidad to refuel. A German submarine had entered the area and sank 2 vessels, but thankfully the Queen Mary received an urgent coded message to leave port and change her route. By the end of the war, she had carried over 800,000 soldiers on 72 trips. On July the 25th, 1943, she broke her troop capacity record when she safely carried 16,683 soldiers out of New York. Many people have seen apparitions of World War II soldiers on the Queen Mary. It seems many of these encounters are residual, where a spectre repeats a loop of its past, with no semblance of intelligence or consciousness. In 2008, a tourist walking through B deck forward witnessed a young man, around 20 years old, in a green army service uniform with short sleeves. The apparition was completely solid in appearance and crossed his hands in front of him. For a moment, the guests thought the man was part of a fancy dress party, until the man turned and walked straight through a wall into a guest room. It seems the same apparition may have been witnessed on December the 26th, 2003, when a couple had dinner in one of the restaurants. As they headed to B deck, they too saw a man dressed in a green army service uniform with short sleeves. He stared at the couple and stood perfectly still, and then he turned and disappeared into a wall. The male guest ran after the apparition, but there was no trace of him. The couple headed to reception. When they asked if it could have been a maintenance man, they were told their uniform consisted of navy blue pants and a light blue shirt. Security pointed out that no one on the Queen Mary wears a green uniform. I hope you enjoyed these stories from the RMS Queen Mary. There are so many ghost stories and encounters to cover, it was impossible to put them all into one video, so this will become a series for sure. As many of you will know, I visited the Queen Mary in Long Beach in the spring for a week, and I absolutely loved it. It was so different, it was so beautiful and so historic. I would go back there in a second if I could. I will tell you much more about our stay and what things happened as the series progresses, but I do have a couple of little ghost stories and some bits and pieces to show you. And if you want to see more footage from my trip to the Queen Mary, please have a look at some of my shorts on YouTube, as I made absolutely loads of them on board, and I think you'll really get a feel for our trip by watching those. If we just go back to the third class stairs between A and B deck, I don't know what it is with this area of the ship, but for some reason I just really didn't like it. I have no idea why. The steps are seriously steep. I don't know, but every time I stood at the top of them, I could imagine falling or stumbling for no apparent reason. And I would grip the handrail hard and move down the steps one at a time. They are carpeted now, but back in the days of sailing they were not carpeted, as with most of the Queen Mary, because people would be sick on board and they would want it to be easy to clean, so they had these kind of corkoid lino floors so that they could be easily cleaned up. Nice. And the guide said to us that at some point they added these little stoppers on the handrail because the third class children were using it as a slide. Can you imagine in rough seas seeing your children sliding down those banisters? Oh my goodness. At the very top of the stairs on A deck, there is an exhibition called the Cunard Story. You can see the poster for it on the top left of this picture. And next to that, there are 2 restrooms. Now, the ladies' restroom is reputedly haunted by a man in an officer's uniform, and he's been seen in there many times by passengers and guests and staff. So you might be thinking, why is there a man in the ladies' toilet? Well, at some point in the past, the restrooms were switched over, and the gents became the ladies. So perhaps this apparition is stuck in a strange cycle of relieving himself, and records do show that a number of members of crew died on board, so this is entirely possible. I didn't see him when I was there, but maybe next time I will. I didn't take any pictures in the toilet either because I thought that was just creepy. Whilst we were on board, I think we did pretty much every tour and they were really very good. I really liked the guides and their enthusiasm. And we did do a paranormal ship walk, which allowed us access to the first class swimming pool and room B340 at that time. The normal ghost tours don't generally take you into those areas, but since we were there, B340 has become available to book, and that started on Friday the 13th of September. I don't know if it's still available to book, but it certainly was in the autumn months. My only criticism of the paranormal ship walk tour that we did was that for me the group was too big. I think we had about 30 people, meaning we had to go into room B340 and the first class pool in 2 groups. And the other thing I found a tad annoying was the number of giggly people with their ghost hunting phone apps constantly blurting out random words and interrupting the guide, which I thought was not right. I just found this distracting. Let's talk a bit about B340. I did see people holding vigils outside it, sitting on the floor just there. They have put a window in the door so people could actually see in, and they've had a problem with people stealing the room number outside. When we went into room B340, absolutely nothing happened. I didn't sense anything, I didn't feel anything. It just seemed to be quite a large and spacious room. It was really interesting to hear the stories behind it and to see that little door in the wall, but again, there were so many of us, I barely got to see the bathroom. And I may be wrong, but I think there are a number of far more haunted rooms than B340. My room on A deck, I'll tell you about what happened in there in a future video, but there are a lot of rooms on the Queen Mary where strange things happen. After this, we visited the first class swimming pool and some other locations on the ship, which I will cover in the future. We were led through some quite rough-looking corridors that had been cleared, and I think they used these areas as part of the scare attraction at Halloween. We entered the swimming pool on D deck and we went through a small door. You can see it in this picture on the left, and you can see the drinking fountain in front of it. And we stood behind the barriers in a really quite small area there. Now, I was standing on the furthest right side of the area, so as I looked into the pool, the slide and the staircase was on my left. And I was listening to the guide, and I think we were there for about 10 minutes. And Mr. GC was stood to my right, or so I thought. This will sound strange, but if you are in a crowded area, you generally know if someone you are with is next to you. And for the entire time I was there, I thought Mr. GC was stood directly to my right. And after the guide had finished speaking, I leant to my right and I said, "Look, you can see where the diving boards were," and I pointed over to the slide area. And then I realised there was no one there. Mr. GC was actually a few people in front of me, next to the drinking fountain. And I was just convinced that he or someone was stood right next to me. It was really strange. Not creepy, but just odd. I was convinced he was there. I took footage on my iPad in the pool room, and just like Dunster Castle, I've got diddly squat to show for it. I'll put the footage on now, but the recording didn't work properly. And I was so disappointed because very few people get to go into the pool room anymore. And so I was really looking forward to it.
What's in this tour? It's just weird. 30 minutes past. So we're going on 2.5 hours.
So again, what happened there with my iPad was a complete mystery. I've got no idea what happened. I will say this, the first class pool, as beautiful as it is seriously eerie. And I know they've used lights and all of this to make it atmospheric, but the reason, in my opinion, that it's so eerie is because it's empty. It's really odd to see that slide sort of hovering over what is actually a very deep pool. And the thought of seeing someone in vintage swimwear about to dive in is truly terrifying, having been in there. I would have quite liked to have seen the cat, though. It's a really chilling place, to be honest. There's quite a bit of speculation as to whether the pool is unsafe structurally and whether it could be refilled, but my understanding is that the shallow end is too deep to conform to Californian state law regarding swimming pools, so I think it's going to remain empty. I will tell you more about my time on the Queen Mary as I cover more locations. I do have an enormous collection of Queen Mary stuff. It's like a museum in my home, but she is so beautiful and spectacular. She really is like a time capsule from the 1930s, and I love everything about her, from her wonderful red funnels and those booming Typhon whistles that would shake me to the core, to her majestic interiors and her Art Deco shops. She really, really is very, very special. First of all, I want to show you my little Cunard Art Deco teapot. Now, on the Queen Mary, they had a whole set in a display case, but I've only got a teapot. And this one says Crown Devon Fieldings, made in England, and I understand that they were manufactured between 1908 and 1935. So this would not have been used on the Queen Mary, as there said Cunard White Star Line, as they had merged by then. But I love the Art Deco design of this little cube teapot, shaped for efficient storage, and apparently the spout is designed to be drip-proof, and you can just imagine having afternoon tea on deck with this dinky little teapot. I have this little postcard from the Queen Mary's maiden voyage in 1936. It was posted in Southampton and it reads, May the 27th, 1936. On board QM. Hope you are keeping well. Shall we see you one Saturday night? Now, the Queen Mary left Southampton at 4:30 on Wednesday the 27th of May and arrived in New York City at Pier 90 on the 1st of June 1936, and the crossing time was 5 days, 5 hours and 13 minutes. And I love this picture of Queen Mary across Trafalgar Square in London. The Nelson Monument is 170 feet high, and that's shown on the starboard side, the crown of Nelson's hat just overtopping the boat deck. And the height from the keel to the forward smokestack top is 181 feet, or 55.17 metres. If it were possible to lay the ship down in this position, it would push in the walls of the Garrick Theatre in Charing Cross Road, and her stern would protrude into Whitehall, and you can see Admiralty Arch in the left foreground of this drawing. I'm not joking, the ship is absolutely huge. It is quite amazing to think that she crossed the ocean and carried all those troops. If you ever visit the Queen Mary, the decks and the corridors are huge, and strangely I found many times that I'd walk the length of the sun deck or A deck and I would be entirely on my own. You might not even see another person, which is really strange. I also have this postcard from 1948, and it says, a magnificent day, a grand ship, a calm sea, and a smooth entry into Cherbourg, from where this card is posted, love Dad. And I just think that's such a lovely, short but sweet message. I have this little commemorative card from her final voyage to Long Beach in 1967, and it even has a tiny Halloween link. She left Southampton for her final voyage on Halloween in 1967. Now you might be wondering why she didn't go through the Panama Canal, which would have saved a lot of time. Well, it's because she's 8 feet too wide. And her final journey was 14,500 miles, which was her longest peacetime journey. And this cover is signed by Captain John Treasure Jones, who was captain at the time and who was a very distinguished mariner. And finally, I just have one menu for you to have a look at, and it's a lunch menu from 1949. Now, I had to look up brislings. They are some sort of premium type of sardine. Not sure about lamb's tongues, they sound awful. Potage flamand, which I had to look up, it's a sort of soup made with potatoes, leeks and sprouts. But there's such a huge range of foods. Bearing in mind this is 1949, I just think it's quite extraordinary. Look at the amount of cold buffet meats they have, and all the different ice creams. Awful lot of cheese. Stay away from the cheese after what happened to me at Christmas last year with the camembert. Anyhow, I thought you might like to have a look at this menu. So I just want to say happy Halloween to you all. Don't forget to come and find me on Instagram. Please remember to like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. And take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.